Assumptions rooted in appearance create invisible chains that bind people long before a single word is spoken. The moment someone is judged by the color of their skin, the cut of their clothes, or the way they carry themselves, a silent verdict is passed. These judgments do not clang like iron shackles, yet they weigh just as heavily, shaping how opportunities are granted, how voices are heard, and how dignity is either respected or denied. Appearance becomes a shortcut for lazy thinking, allowing prejudice to masquerade as instinct while robbing individuals of their humanity. In many spaces, especially those associated with power or privilege, appearance is treated as an unspoken credential. People are measured against an imagined template of authority, and anyone who does not fit it is treated as an outsider. This creates a hierarchy where belonging is decided at a glance, not by merit, effort, or integrity. The damage begins quietly, with questioning looks, unnecessary scrutiny, and subtle exclusions that signal to someone that they are being watched more closely, trusted less, and valued conditionally. These invisible chains tighten when assumptions turn into actions. A request to prove oneself, a demand to justify one's presence, or an expectation of compliance becomes normalized. The person on the receiving end is forced into a defensive position, compelled to explain what others are never asked to explain. This constant need to validate existence is exhausting, and over time, it erodes confidence, ambition, and self-worth. What appears to be a single incident is often the culmination of countless small indignities that have gone unchallenged. Appearance-based assumptions also shape how authority is perceived. When power is expected to look a certain way, those who defy that image are met with resistance. Their decisions are questioned more aggressively, their mistakes magnified, and their successes attributed to luck rather than competence. This double standard reinforces the illusion that leadership and intelligence belong to a select few, while everyone else is merely borrowing space that was never meant for them. The most dangerous aspect of these assumptions is how easily they are internalized. When society repeatedly signals that someone does not belong, the message can seep inward, convincing individuals to limit themselves before anyone else does. Dreams are downsized, voices are softened, and aspirations are reshaped to avoid confrontation. The chains become self-sustaining, not because they are accepted, but because resisting them comes at a personal cost that many are forced to weigh daily. Bystanders play a critical role in strengthening or breaking these chains. Silence, even when well-intentioned, acts as approval. When others witness appearance-based discrimination and choose comfort over courage, they validate the prejudice at work. The absence of opposition allows assumptions to harden into norms, teaching everyone present that such behavior is acceptable, expected, and protected from consequence. Yet these chains are not indestructible. They rely on collective belief and repeated reinforcement. The moment assumptions are challenged, their fragility is exposed. When someone refuses to shrink, refuses to apologize for existing, and stands firmly in their truth, the illusion begins to crack. The discomfort that follows reveals how shallow and baseless the original judgment was. Breaking free from appearance-based assumptions requires more than individual resilience. It demands a conscious effort to question instincts that have been shaped by biased narratives. It requires institutions to examine whose comfort they prioritize and whose dignity they are willing to compromise. It calls for environments where respect is not conditional upon looking the part but is guaranteed by shared humanity. Every time these invisible chains are exposed, a larger truth emerges. Appearance has never been a reliable measure of worth, capability, or authority. It has only been a convenient excuse for exclusion. When this excuse is stripped away, what remains is the undeniable reality that power, intelligence, and leadership do not announce themselves through looks, but through presence, action, and conviction. Racism often disguises itself as entitlement, presenting prejudice not as hatred but as a presumed right to dominate, question, or displace others. It appears in moments where someone believes they are owed comfort, priority, or superiority simply because of who they are or who they think they are. This form of racism is especially insidious because it cloaks itself in confidence and authority, making it seem reasonable, even justified, while inflicting deep harm on those it targets. Entitlement-driven racism thrives in environments where power dynamics already exist. Spaces like airplanes, boardrooms, hotels, or public institutions become stages where individuals act out inherited beliefs about hierarchy. A person who feels entitled does not see their behavior as discriminatory. They see it as restoring what they believe is the natural order. Their demands are framed as preferences, complaints, or standards, rather than as acts of exclusion. This framing allows racism to operate in plain sight without being immediately challenged. What makes this behavior particularly dangerous is its reliance on social reinforcement. Entitled racism often counts on others to comply quietly, whether out of fear, convenience, or indifference. When staff members prioritize appeasing the loudest voice, when bystanders avoid involvement, the entitled individual interprets this compliance as validation. Each concession strengthens their belief that their demands are legitimate and that the system exists to serve them above others. This disguised racism also exploits stereotypes to justify its actions. Assumptions about competence, wealth, intelligence, or authority are used to rationalize why someone should be questioned or removed. These stereotypes do not need to be spoken aloud to be effective. They are implied through tone, body language, and selective enforcement of rules. The target of such behavior is left to navigate a situation where the real accusation is never openly stated, yet clearly understood. Entitlement strips its targets of dignity by reducing them to obstacles rather than individuals. The entitled person does not consider the emotional or psychological impact of their actions because their focus is inward, centered on their own comfort. Empathy is replaced by expectation. The harm caused is dismissed as irrelevant or exaggerated, further dehumanizing the person being targeted. Over time, this form of racism shapes institutional behavior. Policies may be applied unevenly, with flexibility extended to those who demand it and rigidity imposed on those who are expected to comply. This creates a feedback loop where entitlement is rewarded and resistance is punished. The system begins to mirror the biases of those who exploit it, reinforcing inequality under the guise of customer service, professionalism, or maintaining order. The emotional toll on those who experience entitlement-driven racism is profound. Being treated as replaceable or undeserving creates a sense of vulnerability and isolation. The burden of responding appropriately becomes heavy, as any reaction risks being labeled as aggressive, ungrateful, or disruptive. This emotional tightrope forces individuals to suppress justified anger in order to protect themselves from further harm. Challenging this disguised racism requires recognizing entitlement for what it is, not as assertiveness or confidence, but as an abuse of perceived privilege. It demands accountability from both individuals and institutions. When entitled behavior is named and confronted, its power diminishes. The illusion of authority collapses when it is exposed as baseless and unjust. True equity cannot exist where entitlement goes unchecked. Respect must be grounded in fairness, not in who demands it the loudest. When society begins to prioritize dignity over appeasement, the space for disguised racism shrinks. The exposure of entitlement as a vehicle for prejudice forces a reckoning with uncomfortable truths about who has been allowed to dominate public spaces and why silence from bystanders empowers injustice by creating an environment where wrongdoing feels safe, protected, and normalized. When people witness discrimination and choose not to respond, their inaction becomes a form of participation. The absence of objection sends a powerful message to the aggressor that their behavior is acceptable, or at the very least, unchallenged. In that quiet, injustice finds room to grow, confident that it will not be interrupted. Bystander silence often stems from fear of discomfort rather than agreement with the act itself. People worry about drawing attention to themselves, escalating the situation, or facing social consequences. This hesitation is understandable, yet its impact is profound. Each moment of silence shifts the balance of power further toward the person committing the injustice, leaving the targeted individual isolated and unsupported. The harm multiplies not because one person acted wrongly, but because many others chose convenience over courage. In public spaces, silence carries particular weight. When discrimination unfolds in front of a crowd, the lack of response transforms a private offense into a collective failure. The targeted individual is forced to stand alone under scrutiny, while the crowd becomes an unspoken jury that has already delivered its verdict through inaction. This dynamic deepens the humiliation and reinforces the idea that speaking out will only make things worse. Silence also reinforces systemic inequality by allowing patterns of behavior to repeat unchecked. When no one intervenes, incidents are dismissed as isolated or insignificant, even when they are part of a larger trend. Institutions learn that there is little risk in ignoring complaints or prioritizing appeasement over justice. Over time, silence becomes embedded in the culture, shaping norms that discourage accountability and reward passivity. For those experiencing injustice, bystander silence can be more painful than the original act. The lack of support communicates indifference, suggesting that their dignity is not worth defending. This realization can be deeply destabilizing, eroding trust not only in individuals but in the broader social contract. The expectation that others will step in during moments of harm begins to fade, replaced by a sense of vulnerability and self-reliance born from necessity rather than choice. Bystanders often underestimate the power of even small acts of intervention. A single voice questioning unfair treatment, a visible show of solidarity, or a calm assertion of fairness can disrupt the momentum of injustice. These actions do not require confrontation or heroics. They require presence and intention. When someone breaks the silence, it becomes easier for others to follow, transforming a passive audience into an active force for accountability. The normalization of silence teaches future generations how to respond to injustice. When young people observe adults looking away or remaining quiet, they internalize the message that discrimination is either acceptable or too risky to challenge. This learned behavior perpetuates cycles of harm, ensuring that injustice is passed down not just through actions, but through omissions. Breaking the silence requires a shift in perspective. Speaking up should not be viewed as interference but as responsibility. It involves recognizing that neutrality in the face of injustice is not neutral at all. It favors the status quo. When bystanders understand their role in either enabling or resisting harm, the moral weight of silence becomes impossible to ignore. Creating a culture where silence is replaced by solidarity demands collective effort. Institutions must encourage and protect those who speak out, while individuals must practice empathy that extends beyond personal comfort. When people choose to act, even in small ways, they weaken the foundation that injustice relies upon. In moments where silence once reigned, the presence of a single voice can change the trajectory of an entire situation. The courage to speak does not erase the harm already done, but it prevents its repetition. When silence is broken, injustice loses its shield, and accountability becomes possible. True power does not announce itself. It reveals itself in moments of pressure, restraint, and clarity. It does not rely on volume, threats, or demands for recognition, because it has no need to prove its existence. Those who possess real power understand that authority rooted in truth carries its own gravity. It remains calm when challenged and steady when tested, allowing actions rather than words to establish legitimacy. In contrast, false power is often loud and performative. It seeks validation through dominance and control, mistaking compliance for respect. This kind of power is fragile, dependent on constant reinforcement from others, and quick to react when questioned. It thrives on intimidation and spectacle, revealing its insecurity through aggression. The more it is challenged, the more desperate its display becomes, exposing its hollow core. True power is revealed through composure. When faced with disrespect or provocation, it does not rush to assert itself. Instead, it observes, assesses, and responds with intention. This measured response unsettles those who rely on chaos and confrontation to maintain control. Calmness becomes a form of resistance, signaling confidence without confrontation and strength without hostility. Authentic authority also reveals itself through consistency. It does not change its values based on the audience or the situation. Whether in public or private, under scrutiny or anonymity, true power acts in alignment with principle. This consistency builds trust, not through declarations, but through repetition of ethical behavior. Over time, this reliability becomes unmistakable, distinguishing real leadership from temporary dominance. Another hallmark of true power is its ability to listen. Those who are genuinely secure in their authority do not fear dissenting voices. They welcome questions and challenges because they understand that power strengthened by dialogue is more resilient than power enforced by silence. Listening does not weaken authority. It refines it, allowing better decisions and deeper understanding. True power often remains invisible until it is needed. It does not seek the spotlight, yet when circumstances demand action, it steps forward decisively. This readiness contrasts sharply with performative power, which constantly seeks attention but falters when accountability is required. The reveal of true power is often quiet but transformative, shifting dynamics without spectacle. Respect is another indicator of authentic power. It is given freely, not extracted through fear. Those who wield true power do not diminish others to elevate themselves. They recognize that authority grows when others are empowered rather than suppressed. This approach fosters loyalty and cooperation, creating environments where people feel valued rather than controlled. True power also carries responsibility. It understands that influence affects lives and outcomes, and it acts with awareness of that impact. Decisions are made with consideration for consequences, not just personal gain. This sense of responsibility anchors power in ethics, ensuring it serves a purpose beyond self-interest. When true power is finally revealed, it often disrupts assumptions. It challenges preconceived notions about who belongs, who leads, and who commands respect. This revelation can be unsettling for those who equate power with appearance or status. The moment exposes the limitations of superficial judgments and forces a reassessment of deeply held biases. The reveal of authentic power does not humiliate, it clarifies. It shows the difference between authority earned and authority assumed. In that clarity, false power loses its hold, and the imbalance it created begins to correct itself. The quiet certainty of true power reshapes the space it occupies, not through force, but through undeniable presence. Authority exposed can dismantle arrogance instantly, because arrogance depends on illusion, while authority stands on truth. Arrogance thrives when it believes it will never be challenged, when it assumes compliance is guaranteed and resistance is unlikely. It feeds on perceived superiority and unchecked entitlement, growing louder and bolder the longer it operates without consequence. The moment real authority enters the space, that carefully constructed illusion begins to fracture. Arrogance often mistakes confidence for dominance. It assumes that speaking forcefully, demanding attention, or exerting pressure will bend situations in its favor. This behavior relies heavily on the belief that no one present has the legitimacy or courage to intervene. As long as this belief holds, arrogance feels safe, pushes boundaries because it expects them to collapse. What it does not anticipate is the quiet presence of authority that does not need to perform. When true authority is revealed, the shift is immediate. The tone changes, the posture softens, and the certainty that once fueled arrogance dissolves into hesitation. This transformation exposes how fragile arrogance truly is. It was never strength, only assumption. The reveal does not require confrontation or aggression. Its power lies in clarity. Facts replace posturing, and legitimacy replaces noise. Authority dismantles arrogance by redefining the hierarchy that arrogance thought it controlled. Suddenly, the person who demanded, belittled, or dismissed others is forced to recognize boundaries they believed did not apply to them. This recognition is deeply unsettling because it confronts the arrogant individual with their own lack of control. The dominance they assumed evaporates, leaving behind discomfort and embarrassment. The speed at which arrogance collapses reveals its dependence on ignorance. Arrogance survives by betting that no one will question it, that appearances will be accepted at face value, and that authority will never be verified. Once authority is exposed, that bet fails. The arrogant individual realizes that their actions are now visible, accountable, and subject to consequence. This realization strips arrogance of its power. What makes this dismantling so effective is that it does not rely on humiliation. Authority does not need to insult or overpower arrogance. Its mere presence corrects the imbalance. This correction is often more impactful than retaliation because it leaves no room for argument. The situation resolves itself through truth, not force, making resistance futile. Witnessing arrogance collapse has a ripple effect on everyone present. Those who felt powerless gain validation, and those who remained silent are reminded of the importance of accountability. The environment shifts from one of fear or discomfort to one of clarity. Authority restores order not by imposing dominance, but by reaffirming fairness and legitimacy. Arrogance also collapses internally when authority is exposed. The individual is forced to confront the gap between who they believe themselves to be and who they actually are within the structure of reality. This internal reckoning can be more destabilizing than any external reprimand. It exposes the insecurity that arrogance was designed to mask. The dismantling of arrogance serves as a reminder that power assumed is not power held. Real authority does not announce itself in advance, which is why it catches arrogance off guard. It waits, observes, and reveals itself only when necessary. This timing maximizes its impact and minimizes conflict. In moments where arrogance once dominated, the exposure of authority restores balance. It affirms that systems, rules, and ethics still matter. It demonstrates that entitlement is not invincible and that truth does not need to shout to be heard. The collapse of arrogance in the face of real authority is not just a personal defeat. It is a correction of injustice that reestablishes dignity and respect for everyone involved. Respect is not demanded. It is enforced by truth, consistency, and accountability rather than volume or intimidation. When respect is demanded, it reveals insecurity, a reliance on power that exists only when others submit. True respect operates differently. It emerges when actions align with principles and when integrity is demonstrated over time. This kind of respect does not need permission. It commands recognition through authenticity. Many people confuse respect with fear. Fear can be extracted quickly through authority, threats, or status, but it is fragile and temporary. The moment the source of fear weakens, compliance disappears. Respect, however, is resilient. It persists even when no one is watching because it is rooted in belief rather than coercion. Truth gives respect its foundation, making it difficult to undermine or manipulate. Truth enforces respect by exposing reality. It strips away assumptions, false narratives, and appearances that often dictate how people are treated. When truth enters a situation, it clarifies roles, rights, and responsibilities. Those who relied on perception or prejudice lose their advantage, while those grounded in honesty gain stability. Truth does not argue. It reveals, and in that revelation, respect is recalibrated. Consistency reinforces respect by removing unpredictability. When someone consistently acts with fairness, professionalism, and self-respect, others learn what to expect. This reliability creates a standard that discourages mistreatment. People are less likely to test boundaries when they know those boundaries are firm and principled. Consistency communicates seriousness without confrontation, making respect a natural response rather than a forced one. Accountability ensures that respect is not optional. It establishes consequences for actions and behavior, preventing disrespect from going unchecked. When systems and individuals are held accountable, respect becomes embedded in the environment. Disrespect loses its appeal when it carries consequences, and entitlement weakens when it is no longer rewarded. Accountability transforms respect from a personal expectation into a shared obligation. The enforcement of respect through truth often unsettles those who benefited from ambiguity. When truth is made visible, it removes the cover that allowed disrespect to thrive. This can lead to resistance, denial, or discomfort, but these reactions only highlight how necessary truth is. Respect built on illusion collapses easily, while respect anchored in truth endures scrutiny. Self-respect plays a critical role in how respect is enforced. When individuals honor their own worth, they are less likely to tolerate mistreatment. This does not require aggression or defiance. It requires clarity and confidence. Self-respect sets the tone for how others are allowed to engage. It communicates boundaries that do not need to be negotiated repeatedly. Communities and institutions also shape how respect is enforced. When leadership models truth, consistency, and accountability, these values cascade downward. Environments that reward ethical behavior and challenge misconduct create cultures where respect is the norm rather than the exception. In such spaces, disrespect stands out and is addressed rather than ignored. The enforcement of respect through truth also redefines power. It shifts influence away from those who rely on intimidation and toward those who operate with integrity. This shift changes interactions at every level, from individual encounters to systemic practices. Respect becomes a shared standard rather than a contested demand. When respect is enforced by truth, it becomes sustainable. It does not depend on mood, status, or dominance. It exists because it is justified. In moments where respect was once denied or conditional, truth restores balance by affirming worth and legitimacy. This form of respect cannot be taken away by prejudice or entitlement because it is grounded in reality rather than perception.